Welcome to this bonus episode of the Middle East Breakdown. I'm Dan Feferman. In this special segment, we're revisiting one of the most powerful parts of my conversation with Islamabad-based veteran journalist, war correspondent, Middle East expert Ahmed Quraishi, his upbringing, his indoctrination in the Middle East, his first historic and media-covered visit to Israel, how the Palestinian story has been hijacked, and the personal cost of speaking the truth about it. We also explored the lost Jewish history of the Middle East and South Asia, including my own personal family history, the story of the Jews of Baghdad. We explore backlash, the threats, and the danger faced by journalists who challenge those lies. Ahmed speaks candidly about the intimidation campaigns he's endured, and we remember the late Imtiaz Mir, a dear friend of mine and a colleague of Ahmed's, a brave Pakistani journalist, murdered by extremists after visiting Israel and hosting Israeli guests on his platform. Ahmed further explains how regimes and movements from Gaddafi to Khomeini weaponize the Palestinian cause for their own agendas, and how Western activists now carry that torch for ideological reasons that have little to do with the Palestinians themselves. He draws striking parallels between Pakistan's internal ideological wars and the way the Middle East has been trapped in narratives built to serve power and not peace. This episode is both political and deeply human, a reminder that truth-telling in this region still comes with a price. Let's get into it. Joining us live from Islamabad. How are you, Ahmed?
Great to see you. I'm very well. Thank you.
You've had quite the interesting career. You've spent a couple of decades as a Middle East war correspondent. You've advised the Pakistani government on foreign affairs, Middle East affairs, and now you're doing kind of a combination of reporting, of analysis, of journalism, and of behind the scenes advising. Did I miss anything?
No, you didn't really. And, the good thing about being in the media is you get to, get into these roles, Dan, and it's really fascinating, from that perspective. And I had the opportunity to work in the Pakistani government, in the Jordanian government, briefly also with the US government after 9/11. So, and when the US military were first deploying in the Gulf after the first Gulf War, after Iraq invaded Kuwait, Operation Desert Storm, fascinating moments and times, obviously, in this region. So I'm very lucky in that respect, and it's really an honor sometimes. You think, working in the media, you get to meet these really fascinating people, both who are working for in government, in military, and everything in between. So it's really fascinating. And I'm sure you have a similar experience, a similar trajectory. So we're lucky in that sense, to be working.
It's a fascinating line of work for sure. I mean, you and I met actually when you made history, and you were the first. I think you might have been the first Pakistani to publicly travel to Israel. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the first publicly, because then, of course, obviously, other delegations privately coming in, including journalists. But thanks to you, and thanks to a great friend of yours and mine, Anila Ali from the AMWIC organization in Washington, D.C., of American Muslim women, and Sharaka, obviously, and you were with Sharaka at that time. You guys, thanks to you, I managed to, at the very last minute, to join you from Islamabad. And at that time, I was working as a freelancer with the state media. I was not a proper employee of the government, but a state media outlet, the state TV. And I was hosting a TV show, just as an outside talent, we call it here in Pakistan. And I went with you, and I was lucky, thanks to you and the delegation in Shirak and Amwick, to meet also President Isaac Herzog, and some wonderful, amazing people in think tanks and the Knesset and in normal Israeli life. And it was fascinating. It was a huge, big story, a story that went on for like a month. And I think during that month, not just me, Dan, but Sharaka and you guys and everybody were like, you made news history in Pakistan. You now make news. Whenever the story of Pakistan-Israel relations will be written, you can rest assured to be part of it.
But that is very cool, and you and Anila and of course many other wonderful Pakistani journalists, intellectuals, and religious leaders that I've met since then certainly have opened my eyes to a part of the world that we actually don't think about very much here in Israel. But you grew up, if I recall, in Kuwait. You grew up in the Arab world. You're a native Arabic speaker, basically. Um, I want to, before we kind of dive into what's happening now, because there's so much happening. I mean, what was your understanding of Israel, of the conflict, of the Israeli-Arab conflict, and then how did that change, the first time you came to Israel and explored the country, and you've been here a few more times since? I mean, could you just take us into that a bit?
Well, yeah, well, Dan, I've been reading about Ben Gurion since I was a kid. I can exactly tell you how old I was when I first read about Ben Gurion. That I probably was 9 or 10 years old, honestly, when I first read about Ben Gurion. I had no choice but to read about Ben Gurion. Why? Because I was born in Kuwait, which was the second largest Palestinian diaspora outside of Jordan at that time. But before the 1990 Gulf War,
Right.
when 500,000 Palestinians were expelled from Kuwait because the PLO and Arafat supported Saddam Hussein, and Yasser Arafat created the PLO and the first Fedayeen camps in Kuwait, and he used to be a roads engineer or something in the Kuwaiti Ministry of Public Works. And when in the 1960s, when he was approached by the Kuwaiti government and offered to create PLO, you'll be surprised, by the way, even now in Ramallah, the capital of the Palestinian Authority government, there are many, and their children and their grandchildren who are dual Palestinian Kuwaiti citizens, and they still carry Kuwaiti passports. In fact, the couple of very well-known Palestinian influencers working via Al Jazeera and in the West, who are Palestinians, but they're Kuwaiti citizens because their grandfathers or fathers or grandfathers were part of the PLO in Kuwait. So I grew up in Kuwait. My teachers were Palestinian, wonderful people, amazing people, families. That's where I first came to know about, various parts of Palestinian territories and the stories. And when on a weekend, then when I wanted to go to a bookshop and buy a book or a novel, just to spend the week, either the weekend, sorry. Normally I would end up with booklets of stories of the leaders of the Palestinian movement. Ibrahim Abu Diya, Abdul Qadir Husseini, and Sawa Al Khaldi, a whole list of people, and I would read. So I grew up with the Palestinian public political folklore, the Palestinian narrative. And honestly, Dan, when I joined you in 2022 for the first time in Tel Aviv, and the nearby areas. When I saw the old architecture, you will be shocked. I felt like I was transported back to Kuwait of the 1980s and the Kuwait of 1990s. Why? Because the architecture, the old buildings, the constructed back in the 1970s, maybe 60s, 70s, 80s, bore, I mean, amazing resemblance to the buildings in Kuwait. And I was like, how come? When I
Interesting.
and I went, yeah, and I went back, Dan, and I spoke to a couple of Palestinians who are still in Kuwait or who lived in Kuwait but are still in the Gulf and maybe in Dubai or in Qatar, and they told me there are so many engineers and contractors from Jaffa, from Jerusalem, from Lud, from so many of these places who were trained inside Israel, and they came to the Gulf and brought that architecture with them. So yeah, so I basically grew up in Kuwait with the Palestinian folklore, with the PLO. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I used to accompany my friends to the Fedayeen training camps with AK-47s. I had no idea what's going on there. My friends, either their elder brothers or their uncles or their fathers, were training as Fedayeen. I had no idea. Obviously, you can't pull it against me. I had no idea what they're doing. But up until I think 1985, there were still Fedayeen camps. I think they were phased out by mid 80s, and they moved all to between 75 and 85. They moved first to Jordan, and then they moved to Lebanon. So
Fedayeen, you're talking about the guerrilla training camps that the Palestinian guerrillas and militants used to train at.
yeah, no, let's be more specific. We're talking about the future hijackers, the future hijackers of Pan Ams from Pakistan, from Karachi, and from from elsewhere, from Jordan and from everywhere. So the future hijackers of planes, the future bombers, the future suicide attackers, and the guerrilla warfare, obviously in Lebanon and in Jordan, were being trained in Kuwait. And I, by a fluke, by a chance, I mingled with them thanks to my friends, my classmates, and it was fascinating. It was amazing.
Unbelievable. And so how did it feel? How did it feel? What surprised you? What didn't surprise you then when you came here on your visits, when you interacted with people? What stood out to you from everything you had learned, thought you had learned, saw on TV?
Yeah, I know, Dan. I mean, this is so, it makes you think of how, I always say, I might be controversial when I say this, but I really believe the story of Israel and the story of the Palestinians, both these stories are really hijacked because everything I grew up to learn about both Palestinians and about Israel is not what I discovered later when I investigated and researched on my own. So for me to land at Ben Gurion Airport and really just to see, what Israel is really like and what Israelis are like, know what to say. It was like, I don't know. It was like I travel. It was as if I traveled to Mars or some other planet, and I'm like, how come we live in the same region? We're just barely a few hundred kilometers away, maybe 1,000 kilometers away, and we get each other so wrong. How can that be? I mean, so wrong. So it was an eye opener. It was an even bigger eye opener for me to be in Tel Aviv and to meet Arabs, Muslims, of Palestinian heritage, who are Israeli citizens, uh, eh, 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 running their shops around the corner in Tel Aviv. To meet Israelis, Arab Muslim soldiers in the IDF, serving in the Israeli foreign ministry as ambassadors in other countries.
Does
And
that
they're
break
Arabs.
all your stereotypes and all the things that you hear about in the Arab world?
It did. It did completely. I felt cheated. I felt violated. I felt this was so wrong. Why did I spend my teenage years being indoctrinated in a wrong story? That is not the right story. The story I was told was that there are a bunch of Jews, who are Hungarians, maybe, or Polish, or God knows what, and they don't belong, and they're occupying, and they expelled the natives, and they're occupying. I come there and I discover there's a territory called Palestine. It used to be the Kingdom of Israel. It became Palestine because of the Romans. They renamed it. A bunch of migrations, mostly Christians and Jews, but later, much later, Muslims and Arabs. And everybody lived there. It's nobody's territory. There was a good solution in 1948. One party accepted it. The Jews did accept it. Unfortunately, the Arabs, whom we call now the Palestinians. By the way, it was a huge bummer for me, a new discovery to know that the term Palestinian actually implied Jews and Arabs.
Yeah.
It didn't mean an Arab only or a Muslim only. It was Jews, Arabs, and including, of course, Muslims and Christians and Druze and other minorities in British Mandate Palestine. So to discover all of that, and the most important part, Dan, the most important, to see the Israelis and the Jews, just like you, Iraqis and Polish. And of course, when you say Polish and Hungarian, it was something amazing. I'm a history buff.
Yeah, so we're not
Me to
Slavs, right? You're not
exactly,
Slavic. We're not white European.
exactly. So for me to discover that, I mean, we have right now Muslims, second and third and fourth generation, born in Sweden or in London or in Canada or in the US. So it was the same for Jews who used to live in Palestine, which was the Kingdom of Israel, and then it spread all over. And some of them obviously went to Poland and Hungary and Russia and God knows where else, and even India, as far as India, and maybe even Indonesia And even China, there were Jews in Chicago. There were Jews in Pakistan. They were in Karachi. We have cemeteries here in Pakistan, very old historic cemeteries. In fact, in the 1920s, maybe 1910s or 1920s, the mayor of Karachi, which is Pakistan's New York or Israel's Tel Aviv, Karachi is the equivalent in terms of Pakistan. The mayor of Karachi, a wealthy, rich city, business city, was a local Jew. I like to call it a Pakistani Jew. So the Jews spread all over, and now they get a chance to come back. And by the way, the Jews, that's what I discovered. The Jews have always been there. It's not like, they all, were migrants and came in. No, they're people who've been living there for like, a millennia, I don't know, several centuries. So the point is, and of course, there were Muslims and Arabs who came later, and there've been Christians there, obviously. And as a matter of fact, the Arabs and the Muslims took the territory from Christians. It was a Christian land under the Romans. Obviously, the Jews were
The Byzantines.
over.
Right.
Yeah.
When the Romans became Byzantines.
For me to discover to all of this, Dan, was something totally new. Even now, when I sit with Pakistanis, with my Arab friends, with my, I have childhood friends, Palestinian. We're still in touch. Some of them are in Qatar. Some of them are in the West. Some of them are in Jordan. And I still meet them in Jordan and the Gulf. And we have these discussions. And I say, you know what? You guys are lucky. And I tell my Palestinian friend, you should have seen the look on his face when I said, his name is Bassem. And I said, and he's a smart guy, really smart guy. And I said, Bassem, listen to me. You guys are lucky. The Israelis and the Jews built something out of nothing. Okay? 2 million of you Palestinians are the only Arabs and Muslims who can travel into the US and out whenever you want, because those 2 million carry Israeli passports. You are sitting right next to the greatest startups, the greatest technology, the greatest entrepreneurship, and some of you are partners in businesses and whatnot. Work together. You can beat the entire region, the Palestinians, working alongside the Israelis. And I'm very glad. I'm sure you know that better than I do, but I'm very glad that many Palestinians agree with this narrative. So it's good to see us breaking out of the way the story of Israel and the story of the Palestinians were hijacked. I mean, look right now, everyone you see on the streets of London and New York and Chicago who's claiming to be part of the quote unquote the pro-Palestinian movement do not represent the Palestinians. They have hijacked a story and a label. The label, I call it the label of Palestine. It is hijacked. It used to be hijacked by Gaddafi and Saddam and Assad. And now it was hijacked by Khamenei and the Khomeinists who rule Iran. Everybody who hijacked the Palestinian label was destroyed. Exhibit A, Libya. Exhibit B, Syria. Exhibit C, Hezbollah. Exhibit D, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And now we have Exhibit E, probably the Khomeinists in Iran. Everybody who hijacked this Palestinian label was destroyed. You don't see much Palestinians, by the way, in the protests and in the radicals who are burning things down and breaking stuff up in Amsterdam and in London and in New York. It's mostly people who are doing it, who are hijacking the Palestinian label to promote their own political parties. And surprisingly, it's our friends in the left. I like them; they're good friends. I'm sure you have friends among them as well, Dan. Good people, they're the good politics, and we have so much we agree on, but not when they hijack the Palestinian label and invest themselves in perpetuating bloodshed between Arab Palestinians and Israel. They don't they're not happy that there's a ceasefire right now in Gaza. Yeah, they're not happy. Yeah, they want perpetual killing of Israelis and Palestinians so that they can satisfy some ideology. And they're allied with Islamists in our region, unfortunately, who are also on a path of a forever war to satisfy their own ideological needs. So it's a hijacked story. I'm glad we're talking to each other, Dan, because we're trying to sort of free the story of Israel and the story of Palestine from all of these so-called pro-Palestine movement who've hijacked it.
We were talking last week. We had Palestinian activist Ahmed Quraishi on the show, and one of the things I mentioned I've seen over the years, and I totally agree with you, is that this story, this conflict, which is a conflict, but I mean there are dozens of conflicts around the world over territory, over tribalism, over religion, over who controls who. Your country has been at war with India since 1948, and have been at war with Bangladesh, and the Turks and the
Afghanistan.
Greeks, and the Armenians and the Azeris and the Russians and the Ukrainians. And yet this is the one conflict that symbolizes everything in the world. And if the Israelis, and just the Israelis and just the Palestinians, were left to their own, this would be maybe a more solvable conflict, maybe a more manageable conflict, certainly not one that inflames the world. But I have to ask you, I mean, you live in the Muslim world, and you live in Islamabad, and you travel all over the Arab world, and you're a fairly well-known guy. How and you're not shy about espousing your views. So how are these kinds of views received when you meet with serious people in Pakistan or in different Arab countries?
In, for a time, I was associated and I worked in the government of a former Pakistani president, President Musharraf, and he was a nationalist Pakistani, and he introduced a sort of a slogan called "Pakistan First," and that was a slogan after 9/11, obviously, and it meant to say that Pakistan is really concerned about we're concerned about our own interests first and foremost. We're not worried about other labels like Islamic world and Muslim unity and whatnot, in the fight against Al Qaeda and Islamist and violent Islamists. We don't care about all of that, and we are only worried about our country. The reason I'm telling you this, Dan, is I identify. I'm a journalist. I'm an independent guy, but I also I'm a Pakistani nationalist, and we came up with a sort of a movement at that time called the Pak nationalists, who believe in this identity. And as a Pakistani nationalist, of course, I garnered a lot of respect from a lot of my countrymen who feel the same way about their country. And obviously, it's patriotism, and everybody should be patriotic about their country, their people, and and all of that really gives you obviously a certain level of respect and acceptability, obviously, and having that position and then saying, well, you know what, guys, I really think we are on the wrong side when it comes to Israel-Palestine conflict. We need to, yes, support the Palestinian aspirations in any way we can, but that should not mean that we become mean and nasty when it comes to Israel. We need to, if the Palestinians and Israelis can sit and talk to each other and have an agreement called the Oslo Accords for 35 years where they recognize each other as peoples and work each other, maybe even have economic and security cooperation. I don't see why we can't do the same. I mean, let's support the Palestinian aspirations, but let's also sit with the Israelis and understand their story. They're normal people, they're good people, Let's just see and let's help them, patch up. And so I was surprised because Pakistan, as you know, Dan, I mean, it's very well known. We had the Al Qaeda, we had the Afghan Jihad, we had all these groups, bombings and whatnot. So there's a certain level
Had
of
an exchange of fire with Afghanistan, if I'm not mistaken.
exactly. So we have and we have and right next door we have two countries, Afghanistan and Iran. Both of them are ruled by two different sects, one Sunni, one Shia, but both are called the Sunni Taliban and the Shia Taliban. So the Iranians call their rulers the Shia Taliban, and here you have the Sunni Taliban. So the point is, it was not easy, Dan, but I was lucky to have a certain level of respect both in the Arab media, and I was very lucky, Dan, by the way, to start out in the Arab media and then move on to the Pakistani media. So when you have like people following you and maybe agreeing or disagreeing with you in both Arab and Pakistani media, you kind of have a larger canvas to espouse your views and
So
say
you have
this. So
uh,
yeah,
so you have the street cred to let
yeah, I had
speak your mind. And
completely. Oh yeah, completely. This I had the street cred, and so I was lucky to be accepted by a certain segment of the street, both in the Arab media and also the Pakistani media. That was good, actually.
Very,
But
very
I still,
interesting.
but we still face. But by the way, Dan, we still face threats. By the way, so I was visited by law enforcement in Pakistan. They came to my house, and they said, Ahmed, we have countries, not people inside Pakistan, but we have countries in the region who are known to kill and assassinate, and who have issues with Israel, and they would like to kill people or assassinate people who
Well,
advocate friendship between Israel and Muslims. And so you need
one such very vocal journalist, a dear friend of mine, Imtiaz Mir, was assassinated or murdered not long ago in Karachi, possibly for his having visited Israel and for regularly interviewing Israeli guests on his podcast. And that was quite a shocking, quite.
sadly, I don't know. Yeah, sadly, I'm very, very sorry that I did not get to know him. I knew him, of course, from the media, and I knew from some of our mutual friends that he was a very, very kind, very good person, happy-go-lucky
Big
kind of
heart,
guy. Always,
big heart.
yeah, big heart, always sharing smiles.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
He twice came to Israel, very publicly interviewed on the news, and made it his mission. After coming to visit Israel, I remember his visit because I hosted him, and he was very skeptical at first, and he was asking the toughest questions. And by the end of the trip, this guy, his whole worldview turned upside down, and he wanted to make his whole life about advocating for peace and fighting a lot of the misperceptions that are rife in the I'll say the Middle Eastern media, but certainly obviously in the Pakistani media, where he was, a prominent individual, certainly in Karachi, and certainly in the podcast scene.
and he did something very incredible, Dan, as well. He sat. Karachi is a bustling city. If you recall, during the War on Terror, it was a place where many Al Qaeda hid, and that's where a Wall Street Journal journalist was sort of, I don't know. I think he was killed very brutally on
He was
video.
kidnapped. Daniel Pearl was
Daniel Pearl, yeah,
kidnapped and beheaded by
and
jihadists.
beheaded, yeah, by Al Qaeda, by Al Qaeda, who was who was captured later by the Americans and the Pakistanis working together. So the point is, for Imtiaz to sit in Karachi and talk about this new discovery that he discovered about Israel, and how we should be supporting. We should not be against Israel. We should be supporting Palestinian-Israeli sort of patch up or reconciliation, whatever you want to call it, and a conflict resolution. And for him to sit, and I saw this clip of his, Dan, just sitting on a Pakistani TV channel saying this. I tell you, that's revolution. I mean, that much of the people listening to you and me right now may not find this to be revolutionary. It's the riot act. It's revolutionary for that friend of yours, Imtiaz, my colleague who I did not get to meet, to sit on a Pakistani TV channel in the city of Karachi, where 20 years ago Daniel Pearls was killed by extremists to say what he was saying. So yeah, we have threats. We all face the threats. You do as well, because I know you travel around the region as well. And I think you should do that. You should take up those risks if it's for a good cause, and I think this is a good cause.
I want to jump a little forward here because you talked about Israel and the Palestinians in Oslo coming to somewhat of a recognition. There are day-to-day working relationships. There's tax money. There's an overlap in policing. There's an overlap in human services. There's certain parts such as East Jerusalem where they are residents of Israel and of Jerusalem. They vote in Jerusalem municipality, but then they are citizens of the Palestinian Authority. They have Palestinian passports. So there is, even though there is enmity, there is a level of recognition. There were a few years of somewhat peace, although we came to find out that there was still a lot of incitement in Arabic in the Palestinian Authority. And then we have the Abraham Accords 5 years ago. And to me, this opens up a whole new door for people from all over the region to begin exploring the idea of relations with Israel, not in a way that is anti-Palestinian. So how did you react? How did you connect? What did the Abraham Accords do to you personally? But how do you view the changes in the region from the Abraham Accords?
Yeah, Dan, I want to answer the question in two parts. The first part is want to ask you actually a question. And that's part of my answer, actually. The question I want to ask you. The question is, you said something amazing right now. I mean, I tell you, you have no idea what you just said, and you just glossed over it, because it's normal for you. But trust me, as a media person, I know people in the region, in our region, don't know this, and much of the world doesn't know this. You said in Jerusalem, they're Palestinians who are citizens of the Palestinian Authority, and they probably have Palestinian passports. Some do, some don't.
Or
But
Jordanian
they
passports, right?
and they have Jordanian passports as well, and some, I think, Palestinian as well, right? If I'm not wrong, do they have Palestinian? Yeah, some do, right? Some do, but most have Jordanian, right? So they have Jordanian, they have Palestinian passports, and they also vote in the Jerusalem municipality elections, where the mayors and deputy mayors are often Israeli citizens, and they vote for them or against them, and cooperate and whatnot. So this is an amazing dynamic. Can
I'm
I
gonna
ask
blow your mind. I'm gonna blow your mind even more. You ready for this? If the east there's about 300,000. Okay, so Jerusalem is a city of about 750,000. And of the 750,000, around 300,000 are Palestinians, not Israelis. Most of them are not Israeli citizens. They can apply for Israeli citizenship, and there are different periods of time where some get it, some don't. About 10% have Israeli citizenship. The rest are Israeli residents, and they carry an Israeli passport. They carry Israeli social benefits, economic benefits. They can go to all the Israeli universities. They can work in Israel, etc. Um, if they were more organized and committed politically, they could elect a Palestinian mayor of Jerusalem, of Israeli Jerusalem, because the Jews of Jerusalem are divided between the different political factions, the ultra-Orthodox, the modern Orthodox, the seculars, the liberals, the conservatives. And so were the Palestinians of East Jerusalem, 300,000, had the political will in the organization, they could win the next election, and you would have a Palestinian, not Israeli Arab, a Palestinian mayor of the capital of Israel.
So here's a question. Here's a follow-up. How come those 300,000 or so out of the 700,000 or so residents of Israel, 300 who are Palestinians, how come they're not organized?
Because they boycott the political system.
Really?
Yeah. They refuse to partake in the political system, which they see as oppressive, and
But you just said, Dan, they vote.
they can vote.
They
They don't necessarily vote. They can vote. They have the right to vote.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I find this strange, Dan, because my understanding is the Palestinians of Jerusalem are probably among the most cultured and educated of all Palestinians in the Palestinian territories, because they have, you know, ready access to better universities and international scholarships and travel. And I've seen many of them, by the way, thanks to you. And so my question is, do they not have this understanding? Because I see many Palestinian Arab Israelis who are part of the Israeli political process. And I've seen some of them really very powerful Arab, Muslim, Palestinian ministers in Israeli governments, including an Islamist who goes by the name of Mansour Abbas, who I tell many Pakistanis, and I tell many of my Arab friends, by the way, there's an emir of a Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat-e Islami group inside Israel. You can call it the Jamaat-e Islami Israel, and he's the emir of that group. Obviously, he doesn't call himself that. It's a political party, a modern, but but he was, I think, just a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, he was a kingmaker in the Israeli government, the most powerful minister was in the government, and he's a Muslim Arab Islamist. So can you just tell me, what's behind this dichotomy between 300,000 Palestinians in Jerusalem who are boycotting the process, but then at the same time, you have this very successful example of Arab Muslim Palestinians who are part of the Israeli governments and members of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset.
Look, 2 million, roughly, 1.8 million citizens of the state of Israel, as you mentioned, are Arab Muslim. So a few are Christian, with full citizen rights, and they can partake in the political process. They have multiple parties. Most of the parties are Palestinian nationalist parties. And so, we can actually have a follow-up episode, and I suggest we do that with Israeli Arabs, political analysts, and maybe you and I can talk to them together and dive into all of this, because I want to take you back to kind of more regional things. But
And just an interjection here.
yeah,
What just one interjection. You said they're more nationalist parties, the Palestinian in the Knesset, and I feel they're more like socialist, communist sort of
so there are three parties. One is socialist, is communist. They call themselves the Israeli Communist Party, and there are a few communist Jews in there as well, but they are primarily Palestinian nationalists. Then there is a Palestinian Nationalist Party that doesn't really serve the interests of much of the Arab citizens of Israel. And then there is the Islamist Party that you mentioned of Mansour Abbas, who made a historic decision in the previous government that they announced for the first time that they are citizens of the state of Israel. Their goal is to serve the Arab citizens of the state of Israel, and they acknowledge that Israel was a Jewish state and a democracy. And so they made history by shedding the nationalist element of their political identity and embracing only the religious element. Or
So you're saying this happened for the and are you saying this happened for the first time? That they acknowledged the
yes,
Jewishness of the state and that they're part of it?
yes,
It
and
was
they
for the
want to
first
roll in it as a non-Jewish Muslim minority, and this was the history that was made with Mansour Abbas and the uh, the the party, the conservative Islamist party that he
happened in when? In 2019, 2020, 2021?
this would have been in the Bennett Lapid government. So this was 21, 22. I have to, fact check that.
Wow, wow. So you're telling me, Dan, that since 1948, almost 50 years, the 20th century, and then 70 years later, for the first time, Palestinians accepted to be a recognized Israeli non-Jewish minority in the state of Israel and be part of the political process. My next question to you is how was that received by Israeli Arabs, Palestinians, and the non-Israeli Palestinians? How did they receive it?
Yeah, I'll correct just one part of it, and that is, um, from the state of Israel's point of view, from an official point. Excuse me. I've been dealing with a cough. We'll edit that out. From an
You should
official,
have a glass of water. You should have a glass of water next to you,
I have water and I have
or yeah,
laws.
or a shot of vodka, whichever.
From an official point of view, and in the Declaration of Independence, every inhabitant of the land, regardless of religion, ethnicity, sex, whatever, is welcome to be a full citizen with equal rights of the state of Israel, recognizing that Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. And of course, in practice, it was much more difficult because the Arabs of Israel were ethnically and religiously tied to the enemies of the new state of Israel, that is the Palestinians. And so it took a few decades. There were tense relations. For the first decade, they lived under military rule inside the state of Israel. Today, you have a changing situation, and as I said, I suggest you and I do a follow-up episode with Israeli Arab friends to unpack a lot of this more. But they can participate. Their voting numbers are at about 50%, whereas the rest of Israel votes at about 70% voting rates.
So you still have people who are boycotting the process.
They some boycott the process just because they feel it doesn't change anything. And the how we say in Hebrew, the chidush, right? The new development you had in the last election, in which Mansour Abbas's Islamist party joined the government, is that until now the Arab parties boycotted Zionist governments. Now the problem with saying that, as you probably learned when you're here, and as every Jew knows, and unfortunately many non-Jews don't know, a Zionist is just Jewish nationalism. That's all it is. It's Jewish self-determination. And so these
It's not a grand intergalactical conspiracy. It's just
yeah,
yeah.
this is I always was a part of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's not the
So
when I was a kid, Dan, when I was a kid, Zionism was like It's this dark global conspiracy that you cannot get into. It's intergalactical. It combines humans and non-humans and the spiritual beings. It's out of this world.
If you
It
go
was
on
portrayed to
X,
us by
yeah.
yeah.
If you go on
It was
X and you
portrayed that.
read, if you go on X and you read the anti-Zionist posts, if it didn't lead to violence, it would be almost laughable just how off they are. And all you have to do is just ask a Zionist, what does it mean? And if we just called it Jewish nationalism,
Now,
that's really
now, before we lose track, Dan, before we lose track, you said these Arab parties or voters don't like to vote for Zionist governments or wanted to boycott at some point. So when you say Zionist governments, are you saying there are governments in Israel that are Zionist and there are governments in Israel that are not Zionist?
no, because that's the
Yeah.
absurd. And I don't know if it's the voters, it's their representatives. And from my many conversations with Arab Israelis, they feel most feel they do not have political representation in Israel's political system because their parties do not serve their interests. Their parties are either Palestinian nationalist, anti-Israel, anti the country they live in, and so they're not working for the integration and the rights and the improvement of the Arab communities inside Israel, or they they are, but they're Islamist. And a lot of Israeli Arabs are actually quite modern and they're not Islamist. They're not certainly not conservative. And so, they're quite modern. They're
They're
worldly
Muslim.
educated.
They're Muslim, but they're Muslims, but they're not political Islamists with rigid ideologies.
Correct. And then of course, you do have not a small amount who do vote for the Zionist parties, either left or right. And through the years, you have had Arab representation in all of the mainstream Zionist parties from the left to the right. The Druze, more often than not, will actually serve in the right-wing parties, the right-wing Zionist parties. Um, the you've had Muslims and Christians serving in the left wing, the more far left parties are equivalent here of the Green Party, and
Do you have Arabs and Muslims serving in Zionist?
a few. I don't know what to say if any today. I know in recent memory, you certainly have had a good handful of Arabs serving in the different Jewish parties, the Zionist parties, and then of course you have the Bedouins who also vote differently. A lot of the Bedouins serve in the military. Druze certainly
Yeah.
serve in the military, and so their politics are very different. I want to jump, to today. So we have the Abraham Accords, and the Abraham Accords, were absolutely monumental. We're absolutely
But Dan, I want to interrupt here. I want to interrupt you
go ahead.
before you jump before you jump into the Abraham Accords. One last question.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be. You don't have to answer it. In great length. But I just want your reaction. I want also people who are from my side. Who are probably watching this. To listen to you actually your reaction to the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas. And I know he's not the best of, the most acceptable face either among his people or in Israel. There are a lot of critics of him. But when he stood 2 weeks ago, almost 3 weeks ago in New York at the UNG, at the UN General Assembly, and he said something amazing. He said, it's amazing for people of the Arab and the Muslim countries. He said, we recognize the historic right of Palestinian of the Jewish people in Palestine, and we also recognize Israel's right to exist. So we not only accept, he said, and he was very clear.
Did I miss that?
There you go. That's exactly. Yeah. Because I've been following these statements of Israeli presidents and his speeches, obviously, because he's been for a long time in power. He never said this. He said we want to live, peacefully with Israel, coexistence. But he never said we recognize the right of the Jewish people in Palestine, and we also recognize the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. He says
So
that in our
that is big, Ahmed. That is big. That is new. And I'll tell you, one of the key things here that Arafat never did, and that Mahmoud Abbas for the last 20 years has refused to do. And I believe this is the core of why there's not a Palestinian state today. Because a lot of people in the Muslim world, and unfortunately, a lot of people in the global left, the far left today, don't know is that there were multiple two-state solution offers on the table that the Palestinians rejected. And the last one was in 2008, and that was the most far-reaching offer. And the crux of it is that Yasser Arafat and later Mahmoud Abbas um, were always willing to say we recognize the state of Israel, but they refuse to take that next step that you just said, recognizing that Israel is a Jewish state and that the Jews have a right to live in this land that is called Israel, Palestine, whatever. And the Palestinians publicly and collectively have never done that. And the second we do that, right, um,
Then I
you will
recall
be
I saw.
able, yeah, you will
Yeah,
be able
yeah,
to
I
make such
recall.
a gap here, to bridge this gap.
Yeah, you will. But I did see a very viral clip of a Palestinian cleric standing up. I'm not sure. I think I read that he was either the imam or the khatib of the Al-Aqsa Mosque,
Mm.
and he stood. It's a video clip, and he stood. I don't know if it was an Eid after Ramadan or Eid of the sacrifice, Eid al-Adha, but he stood up on one of those occasions inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and in Arabic, he addressed the people and he said, we have to recognize this is their land. I mean, yes, our ancestors came here, but it is their land. It is the land of Dawood and Suleiman. It is the land on which they built the temple. It is the land that Musa, brought them into to be their homeland. It is their land. Yes, they left. We came. Some of us came now recently. Some of us came a bit earlier. But it is their land too. I mean, obviously, and so he was sort of counseling them to sort of change their mindset. And that was a viral. Yes,
You have to
I
cite
still
this.
I have that clip. So there are Palestinians who believe in that, but again, I'm just responding to the point where you said Palestinian never said this publicly. There are few who did, but you don't see it in the mainstream. There are few who did.
Sure.
You don't see it in the mainstream.
Sure, and that'll be the big change in mentality. And you are right to an extent. By the way, if from my understanding, and I've had talks with scholars on this, I've had talks with Palestinians, with Muslim scholars of the history of the conflict of anti-Semitism, of Muslim anti-Semitism, prior to Hajj Amin al-Husseini and prior to modern Islamism. Um, it was very well understood by Muslim scholars and by Arab intellectuals that, of course, the Jews used to live here and that the temples of David and Solomon are under what is today Al-Aqsa and the Haram al-Sharif. And it got wiped away. I've even seen booklets from the 1920s in Arabic, clearly recognizing that this is the remains of the Jewish temple. Today, a lot of Arabs and Muslims, even here in Israel, Palestinians certainly, but I've even talked to Arab Israelis, educated ones, who had no idea what used to be under what is today the Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount. And the Arab media, by and large, does a huge disservice. I see this every time. It's always, Jewish settlers storming the Al-Aqsa compound, right?
Yeah. I have a
And
problem with that as well. I have a problem with that depiction. The depiction. I have a problem with the depiction
Mm.
because they never storm Alexa Mosque. They're on the periphery. They're just passing by from a great distance from Alexa Mosque and just praying to what used to be there or what's lying beneath that place, the temple itself. And by the way, since you mentioned the Al Haram al Sharif, I'm really sorry. I'm a very proud Muslim, and I'm a faithful Muslim, and I was very lucky thanks to you, when I visited Israel, to have had the chance to go and pray inside Al Aqsa Mosque, and also pray at the wall, and join my Jewish brothers and sisters who were praying there. And I stood there and I prayed, and I believe, of course, every one of us is entitled to their beliefs, but I strongly believe that we pray to the same God, because in Islam, in the first few months and maybe first year or so of Islam, Muslims were told, but we believe that Allah told the Muslims and told our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, told him to pray in the same direction that the people of Moses pray in, toward the temple in Jerusalem. So for a good chunk of time in the early months and years of Islam, Muslims were praying in the same direction as the Jews all over the world. And we shared that direction, which a lot of people today call Islam's first qibla, or the first direction of prayer. So what I'm trying to say is, I was really sorry as a Muslim to know when I came to pray al-Fajr, the dawn prayer in Al-Aqsa, and then join my Jewish brothers and sisters at the wall for prayer. I was really bummed to know that they all welcomed me as a Muslim. They knew I'm a Muslim. They welcomed me at the wall to pray. They were more than happy to tell me how to do it. I even did al-wudu, when you use water on your hands, just like we Muslims do when we go to prayer. So I did the Jewish ritual with the water, and I went to pray. And I was so sorry to discover that I'm welcomed to pray with the Jews. I'm welcome to pray with the Christians at the church nearby. They welcome me to pray inside as a Muslim, knowing that I'm a Muslim. They welcome me, but a Jew who wants to pray, or a Christian who wants to pray, cannot enter the Al-Haram, the periphery, the area of Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that's a political decision. Because in mosques all over the world, including in Pakistan, we allow a person of any religion to enter the mosque. There's no problem with that. You can enter. The only exception probably is, yes, and that's a religious rule, is Mecca. There's a rule that a non-Muslim cannot enter. That's a very clearly written. But other than that, any mosque anywhere in the world, including Al-Aqsa Mosque, Jews, Christians, anybody can enter. I'm so sorry that a Christian and our Jewish brothers and sisters cannot stand there and pray, when they should have the right to stand and pray, because we share that heritage. Dawood and Suleiman, to you, are kings of Israel, but to us are they also prophet for Jews?
Absolutely.
Okay, so wonderful. So they're also prophets to us, to Muslims. So we share these two prophets who stood at that very location twice to build God's temples. And I so love it, and this is a new discovery for me. I so love it to know that the Jews call Allah Hashim, and Hashim was the great-grandfather of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Hashim.
Hashem in Hebrew,
Hashem, yeah.
it just means the name, because we don't say God's name. We're not supposed to say God's name, so we say Hashem in order not to say God's actual name. So it's just saying
Actually,
the name.
yeah. It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of respect. And Hashim is also an Arabic name, because the Jews and Arabs are cousins, and a lot in the Hebrew and the Arabic is mixed. And that brings me to a fascinating thing that a lot of people didn't know. I certainly didn't. I read, I've been indoctrinated in the Palestinian-Israel conflict and struggle, whatever the story, whatever you want to call it, since age 7 or 8, or maybe even 6. But I had no idea that what I later was about to discover when I visited Israel and met Palestinians and Arabs and Israelis and Jews. And I discovered people like you, Dan, who combine within you, in your blood, the heritage of Iraqi Jews and Libyan Jews and Syrian Jews and Jews from Italy, from Spain, from Turkey.
Just check out my beard.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing.
The Babylonian.
Can you tell me about your mother and your mother's side, the Iraqis? I mean, it's just because the Iraqi Jews are part of the Arab Islamic story. We read so much about Baghdad's progress in science, in technology at that time, and in trade and business, and the Iraqi Jews were intrinsic part of it.
The Iraqi Jews, we call ourselves, that side of my family, the Babylonian Jews, because this
Wow.
story goes far beyond there was ever an Iraq, far before there was Arabic had reached Mesopotamia, far before Islam. We're talking about the the expulsion, the first expulsion of the Jews.
The we're going back to Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah.
Yes, we're going
Oh,
to
that's
Nebuchadnezzar,
yeah.
and the first expulsion of the kingdom of Judea and its elites, to uh, Babylon, where you have the establishment of one of the oldest Jewish diasporas, and until the Mongols really came in and destroyed, what was before Baghdad, you had the preeminent center of Jewish life in the world, for about 500 years. So actually,
Was that double? What was that
it
double?
was, and so
Yeah.
we have, if anyone understands Jewish text and Jewish law, we have something called the Talmud, and the Talmud are a series of rabbinic discussions. So all of the greatest scholars of Judaism would go to these academies and learn and discuss and debate and argue everything from Jewish law to history and philosophy, and then reach practical conclusions. But what's beautiful about the Talmud, and it's huge, we're talking about 26 volumes, um, and it spans the course of about 500 years of rabbinic debates, is that you don't just read the conclusion of the debate, you read the debate itself. And so you learn to get into the logic and the thought process of how these different brilliant rabbis reach their conclusions. And so at the end, there would be an adjudication, there would be a decision, and the decision goes by Rabbi X as opposed to Rabbi Y.
So
But
so
you
so
see the entire
Dan,
debate.
yeah, but Dan, are you saying the Talmud was not put together or created in Israel? Are you saying it
We
was
have
done in
two
Iraq?
Talmuds. We have two Talmuds.
Yeah.
And the first Talmud is called the Jerusalem Talmud or the Palestinian Talmud, because at the time it had already become Roman controlled. And before that, you have something called the Mishnah, which are the first rabbinic discussions about the Torah. That takes place in Jerusalem and outside of Jerusalem. And then when Jewish life is all but destroyed in Israel, which becomes Roman and then Byzantine, the major focus of Jewish life, Jewish intellectual life, spiritual life, religious life, shifts to Babel, to Bavel, and to Babylonia, and until 800, I would say, from about 300 to 800 CE. This is the center of Jewish life in the absolute world, and then from there it shifts to Muslim Spain, actually.
Fascinating. Can I ask a question here, Dan? So Babel became the center of Jewish intellectual life for that great period of time. But now, if you go to Babel, it's nothing. It's like a backwater. It's there's no trace. So I know that until just before the creation of Israel, there was a very dynamic Jewish Iraqi community in Baghdad. Very dynamic.
Baghdad, to a lesser extent, Basra, and then what is today Iraqi Kurdistan as well. And so that
And also my second home, and also, by the way, my second home, Kuwait. So there were Iraqi
what is today
Jews
Kuwait, yes.
in Kuwait. There were and Bahrain, in Kuwait and in Bahrain as well. Yeah.
So the
So
Baghdadi
tell me
Jewish
about your
community, yeah,
yeah.
the Baghdadi Jewish
Tell me
community
about
is
your mother's side. I mean, tell me about your heritage. Do you identify with that Iraqi Arab Jewish heritage? Do you identify with that?
I do to an extent. I wish I was more connected to it, to be honest.
Or are you one of those Jews, who, according to the Islamist and the greater pro-Palestine movement, who came from Eastern Europe, you have no relationship to the land?
No, for my father's side came from Eastern Europe, but every Jew everywhere had and has a strong connection to the land. The Iraqi story is until 1948, the Jews of Baghdad were something about one third, maybe even one half of Baghdad. They were certainly the middle class. They were the educated classes, the doctors, the lawyers, the musicians, the artists, etc. And there was a thriving Jewish culture there, and unfortunately, as Nazism was imported into the Arab nationalist movements, and especially into Iraq, and you had a huge pogrom called the Farhud,
Yeah.
in which dozens of Iraqi Jews were killed. Many were rounded up, including I know stories that my grandfather was regularly um, arrested for trivial purposes, beaten, and then my grandmother would have to ransom him with bribes to get him back. And life became so untenable. This was the point. Life became so untenable as essentially Baghdad, but other Arab capitals as well, adopted concepts and ideas of Nazi ideology, but with actual Nazis. I know there was a strong German intellectual element in Baghdad in the 30s, and life became so untenable. They had to leave everything. We're talking about significant properties of a fairly established, even affluent, well,
A lot of riches, a lot of riches, a
all
lot of
left behind,
riches. Yeah.
all left behind,
Yeah.
and they had to essentially become refugees. And so, people talk about the Nakba and people talk about the Palestinian refugee issue. They don't talk about the fact that roughly an equal number of Jews, around 800,000 Jews from Iraq and from Yemen and from Syria and Lebanon, and from Egypt and from Libya and from Tunis and from Algeria, were expelled from their homes, had to leave their properties behind, and this educated family of, let's say, middle class, upper middle class, had to live in refugee tents for 2 years here in Israel. And the difference is they rebuilt and they moved on, and
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Before you
Israeli
move on,
identity, I'll just say Israeli identity today, there are some diaspora communities that are much stronger with their ethnic traditions. The Yemenites are, the Moroccans are, um, the Ethiopians, I think, still are. The Iraqi Jews are, I've found, to be much less connected to our ethnic heritage. And maybe it's because I'm mixed. Maybe, it's because I'm half and half. Maybe it's because I didn't quite grow up here. But I look at my cousins, and they're not so connected to the hardcore Iraqi heritage and knowledge. The older generation, I would say anyone 50 and over, 60 and over, a lot of them still actually speak the Judeo-Iraqi dialect. I unfortunately do not. But again, partly because I didn't grow up here, and partly because my mother married outside of the Iraqi community. But my cousins, I have cousins whose both parents are Iraqi, and they do speak the dialect still.
I'm very glad that you have museums in Israel that have documented this history. And I think that they're also documenting these dialects so that they don't get extinct. And before you move on, Dan, I just want to say one more thing. Maybe we can discuss that, in future conversations. Um, you mentioned how the Nazi anti-Jewish ideology was imported into the Arab nationalist movement, which resulted in, of course, pogroms against Arab Jewish populations across the region in the first part of the 20th century. And I have to say this very quickly, just to be on the record, that unfortunately, Arab Jews and also Arab Muslims, because we all were misled and misguided into fighting with each other. It happened because because Germany was fighting Britain and France, and one way for Germany to sort of, and of course, as you know, France and Germany were making problems, creating problems for Germany in Europe, and Germany thought, hey, how about we create problems for Britain, for Great Britain, and for Germany in the Middle East by stirring trouble between Arab Jews and Arab Muslims, you know?
That's interesting.
And
That's interesting.
yeah, and I know that because in the Indian subcontinent, that's exactly what the Germans did against the British with the Indians and the Pakistanis. So I'm not saying that the problem between the Indians and Pakistanis was created by Germany. All I'm saying is we shouldn't burden
They might
the
have
Germans.
exacerbated it.
Yeah, we shouldn't burden the Germans with too much historical, blame. But but the Germans did try, the Nazis did try to create public popular unrest in the Indian subcontinent between the Hindus and the Muslims in order to create problem for the British. So unfortunately, with the Arabs and the Jews, things spiraled out of control. And I think your story and the story of the Arabs was hijacked by the Cold War, by the Soviets and the West, and everybody played these Palestinian radical groups, and and we have what we have today, unfortunately. But we'll discuss history at some other time.
Well, that wraps up this bonus episode of ME24's The Middle East Breakdown. If you only heard this bonus episode and missed the geopolitical discussion with Ahmed Quraishi, make sure to check out the previous two-part series on our YouTube channel or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you download podcasts, for a fascinating and eye-opening conversation about the Middle East, the Gaza war, the Trump-backed ceasefire plan, radical Islamist movements, and the major shifts taking place in this region. As always, make sure you subscribe to ME24's The Middle East Breakdown on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts for more in-depth conversations and analysis on the new Middle East with ever-fascinating guests and experts. Make sure to give us a good rating and tell your friends, colleagues, neighbors, and pets all about it. Well, maybe not your pets. Follow Middle East 24 on Instagram, on X, on YouTube for clips, updates, and breaking news. All the links are in the show notes. I'm Dan Feferman, co-founder and co-editor of Middle East 24. Thanks for listening, and we will see you in the next episode of Middle East Breakdown.